All right, so we'll start now. So what we had discussed, if there is any question from yesterday's class, we can take it up now. Is there any question? Parinit, you were asking something. I couldn't understand your question on WhatsApp. That what did you mean by feasibility or anything? What was that? Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Right. So, just like my question was that right now, like in the current circumstances, how feasible do you think is printing money? Because like regarding the fiscal deficit and like borrowing money.
I'm sorry, you were speaking on mic, so you'll have to speak louder. Regarding what?
So like regarding borrowing money and that affecting fiscal deficit,
No.
that problem will sort of be, solved by printing money. So like how feasible do you think is like
What do
printing
you mean by
money and
feasible? I just didn't get the word feasible. How feasible is to print money? You need paper, you need ink. What do you
like
mean by feasible? What is your question?
feasible as in like what are the implications that
Oh,
it's going to
so that
pose
is,
on the economy?
yes, so you see, the printing money can always cause inflation. Now, here what is happening is actually two things. Is that economy is simultaneously facing the problem of both supply, in the sense that the supply chains are disrupted, and the demand, that people don't have income. So when you are printing money, and if that causes the increase in demand, but your supply chain is disrupted, then what will happen? It will cause inflation only. So what you have to do is, when you print money, then you have to actually distribute the money, or lend the money in a way that not only the new demand is generated, but also the bottlenecks on those supply chains are addressed. So how will the bottleneck on those supply chains be addressed? By, let us say that some businesses which are actually finding it very difficult to continue, you actually provide them easy credit, you provide them some kind of aid, depends on the details of the specific industries. So when you do that, you are actually simultaneously, this money creation is solving the problem both of demand and supply. So what we need to do is actually take both demand and supply measure at this point of time. Then what will happen? Then the output will increase, employment will increase, income generation will increase. Will that lead to inflation? It may lead to inflation. But then, and inflation is, let us say, is not a good thing. But then, if you don't do it, then the things is going to be worse. So I think at this point of time, printing money is a very good option. And the fact that central government has what central government has done so far is that it gave a fiscal stimulus, which is 0.8% of the GDP. So that's really nothing. It in fact should not be called a fiscal stimulus. What it is basically giving some kind of relief to the poor people by transferring some income in their Jan Dhan account, and releasing some of the food grains, giving it to the states and so on. But really not a substantial in terms of the size of the GDP. This is a very, very negligible amount. The RBI has also announced some kind of monetary stimulus, the details of which is something, how it translates into the benefits to the small businesses, medium businesses, where most of the people are employed. So the small and medium businesses are very, very important. So how does that, how is it actually helping that? How is it helping agriculture sector is something which depends on the details of the monetary stimulus that is given. Fiscal stimulus is completely lacking. And so what happens that once you go out of, your balance sheet is corrupted, you're in a bad shape if you're a small business, and simultaneously your demand is also dried up. So in a situation like this, the help to this firm has to be twofold, both increasing the demand and at the same time helping to solve the balance sheet problem so that one can get back to the business. Once you get back to the business, then slowly you return the loans and so on. Now, the government has given the indication that it is working on the supply side, on the provision of credit side, but there is absolutely zero indication so far that any kind of demand generation from the fiscal stimulus is undertaken. So this is the situation right now. I personally think that printing money is something which must be undertaken here. This is the only way. I mean, that just merely printing money is not going to help. You have to spend it in a particular way. Get into the details of it. Particular way, I discussed the guideline, the basic principle of that, but principle is not sufficient. You have to get into the details of the things. The second thing is that the government so far has not done anything as far as the fiscal stimulus is concerned. So that is it. The point of the printing money is that even if it causes inflation, at this point of time, with this state of the economy, I don't mind inflation if it is that is what is making the small business, medium business to stand and start walking, because that is ultimately if those are not surviving, if those find it difficult to actually survive, then what is the point of saving the economy by having a low rate of inflation? It is pointless. So that is what I think about it. Anyway, so we will start the discussion today. And yesterday I was talking about the liquidity trap. I hope it was clear to all of you. If you have specific questions, you can actually ask me. Someone was asking about that, what about this? Because you see, in practice, what you see that the countries actually may not determine the money supply, but they actually fix the interest rate. So interest rate fixing means that you decide the money supply in a way, given your IS curve, you decide, or given the level of aggregate demand that you have, and the relationship between the rate of interest and aggregate demand, keeping that in mind, you have an IS curve. And given an IS curve in mind, you decide the money supply in a way that your LM curve is such that you get this rate of interest. So this is what is done, what is the meaning of the choosing the interest rate and sometimes fixing the interest rate at that level. What happens when the aggregate demand changes? Maybe because of the autonomous change in demand, or maybe because of, it's primarily autonomous change in demand, or the consumption behavior of the people, propensity to consume increasing or decreasing. For example, currently what you would find that, the people's propensity to consume is going to decline. I mean, some people's propensity to consume is declining in many ways. So, middle class people like us will be very careful in spending money. So the small c is going to decline. On the other hand, for the poor people, they were possibly earning 100 rupees, saving 80 rupees, spending 80 rupees, saving 20 rupees. Now they are earning only 60, so they have to spend everything. So it's going to be complicated. But anyway, the point is that the propensity to consume will determine where the IS curve is going to lie. Similarly, all kinds of autonomous expenditure will actually decide that. So when the IS curve shifts, then naturally the rate of interest will be changing. And in that case, you need to actually increase the money supply also. So if the IS curve shifts to the right, if the autonomous demand increases or the propensity to consume increases, IS curve will be actually shifting to the right. And if this IS curve is shifting to the right, then you need to increase the money supply also. So if there is a shift like this of the IS curve, then correspondingly you also need the money supply to increase. So this is something which will ensure that the rate of interest is fixed. So this framework is something which we can use even in those situations where the government is actually choosing the rate of interest and not choosing the money supply. So most of the arguments can be made in that situation also. I think what exactly will be those arguments is something which now you have learned the tools for it, so it should not really be that difficult for you to actually make any argument that what happens when the rate of interest is increased or decreased, how the economy is going to respond. We have basically developed certain tools for that. Having said that, few things which needs to be discussed here. One is that what is that classical case, what is known as the classical economics. Now remember that if you look at this particular equation, mr by p is equal to k into y minus hy. So if in the classical economics, what happens that the equation is mv is equal to py, and which means that the rate of interest is not affecting the demand for money, because then m by p is equal to 1 or m is equal to 1 by v into py, and 1 by v then can be read as the k here, and h is 0. So if I make h to be 0, if I make k to be 1 by v, then this equation is nothing but the quantity theory of money. And from the quantity theory of money, we also actually derive the money demand function. So this is how the classical case, which is an extreme case, can be interpreted. And further, of course, the assumption that y is something which is fixed. So if the y is fixed, then how would the LM curve look like? The LM curve will be then vertical, because LM curve, on the x-axis you have the output GDP, or y-axis you have rate of interest. So if y is something which is fixed, no matter whatever is the level of I, then essentially the LM curve is actually vertical. And if the LM curve is vertical, as you can draw it, I don't have to draw it here, LM curve is vertical, then if you try and increase the aggregate demand by shifting the IS curve to the right, then all that's going to happen is that the rate of interest is actually going to increase. And insofar as the increase in rate of interest will cause the decline in investment, essentially what you are doing is that you are shifting IS curve, like look at it, this particular diagram. So in this particular diagram, what is happening is that you are shifting the IS curve by increasing the G, and that is causing the rate of interest to increase. And as the rate of interest increases, the investment is actually going to decline. So this is the classical case of full crowding out, in the sense that, you increase G by 10 and output remains the same because you have already reached the full. Yes, something happened. Did I lose contact or something?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So are we there now, all of us?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So getting back to that diagram, then essentially you have the increase in government expenditure will shift the IS curve, but that will cause the rate of interest to increase and investment to decline. And y is equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m. Assuming c and x minus m is not affected by the change in rate of interest, and y is fixed, then an increase in g will lead to a exact equal decline in investment, and that is the full crowding out that is actually taking place. So here you are shown in this graph that how investment is related to rate of interest. So this is the classical case, what is known as the classical case. The monetarism is not in that sense classical, because it would not say that LM curve is vertical. what it would say, normally insist, is that it is better to have, if you the LM curve is something which is positively sloped, and but when you are actually making a or leave the monetary side of it. I think unnecessary you will get confused with the nomenclature. Uh, so the point here is that there is, as far as the money demand is concerned, there is no interest sensitivity. That is the point of the classical economics. This H is zero. The moment you make H to be positive, then you do not have this full classical case. You do not have this vertical LM curve. Then the LM curve is going to be positively sloped. And there, some people will be in favor of, when there is a stimulus that is required, some people will be in favor of fiscal stimulus, and some will be in favor of the monetary stimulus. Both can work depending on the situation. We know that at least there is one situation in which monetary stimulus is not going to work, and that is a situation of liquidity trap. And liquidity trap is not necessarily when rate of interest is zero, but it could be a situation where people do not want to part with their cash because of the expectations about the future prices of the assets. So that is what is going to happen. Look at this diagram. This is simply shown the effect of increase in government spending. So you're familiar with this, nothing new about it. What is being argued though is the following thing, that when you have an increase of the government expenditure, so delta G is increasing. So as you can see here that the delta G has actually increased, then the Y is going to increase, the output is going to increase. So output will increase from this point to this point. So that is your increase in output. But what is happening is, so there is a positive impact of increase in government expenditure, but and that is the output overall is increasing. But what is happening is that the rate of interest is also increasing. And this rate of interest increasing means something which is not shown in this diagram, is that your I is increase, and that would then lead to the investment to decline, right? So investment is declining. So what is the overall impact of increase in government expenditure? That the output increases. So you increase government expenditure by 10 rupees, and let us say output increases by 40 rupees. But then the investment is actually, private investment is going to decline by not 10 rupees, but by essentially less than 10 rupees, by maybe 5 rupees. So there is an increase of G of 10, there is an increase in output of 50, but there is a decline in investment of 5. So there is a partial crowding out that is taking place. Now, whether you take that partial, is that partial crowding out a good thing or a bad thing? Because there will be a decline in private investment. But is this decline in private investment because of whether, let me put it this way, that here what is happening is that increase in government expenditure will cause output to increase, but private investment to decline. So whether the government should be actually undertaking such activity of increasing, giving fiscal stimulus or not. What do you think about it? What do you think about it?
Right. So like if increase in the government expenditure can help like improve capacity in the economy, then even if it leads to crowding out, I think it can benefit both like the private investors, because like if like the size of economy increases, then like even if their share is now lesser, it will still help like increase
No,
their return.
you see. The output has increased. As you can see that, the output has increased. So in some sense, we have, when I am actually talking about a movement from this point E, to point E prime, I have taken all that into account, and then I have actually reached to this conclusion that the output has increased and the rate of interest has increased. So the investment has declined, right? So after taking all that into account, I reached to this particular conclusion. In this framework, I'm talking about this particular framework that we have. Here, the investment is something which is dependent only on the rate of interest. We are not making it dependent on the output. So what you're saying may be correct, but that is really going out of the framework. So, but if you stick to this framework, then you see that there is something bad about the fiscal stimulus. But this bad thing is not that bad. After there is something very good also, which is actually coming out of it, and that is the fact that overall the economy is actually improving. But then there are some people who would argue that instead of fiscal stimulus, if you had actually given the monetary stimulus like this, so that would have caused the output to increase. And in that, what would have happened, so your output would have increased in the same way, and additionally what would have happened is that the rate of interest would have declined. So isn't it a better thing? Because essentially you are increasing the output, but there is no crowding out, and this increase in output is on the basis of the increase in the private investment rather than increasing the government expenditure. I mean, when the output is increasing, there has to be some kind of increase in aggregate demand. So isn't it better to have increase in aggregate demand through increase in investment fueled by decline in rate of interest rather than increase in government expenditure? So that is a point that why they say that one should actually go for a monetary stimulus rather than the fiscal stimulus. I mean, people like Raghuram Rajan and so on, still even during this epidemic, are not very forthcoming about the fiscal stimulus. I mean, you're not saying it, putting it very clearly, because that's a orthodox monetarist view which these people represent. I've been telling you about that from the very beginning, contrasting people like Raghuram Rajan to the Abhijit Banerjee. I find my people like Abhijit Banerjee to be much more convincing, but there is an alternative viewpoint which I just described. So this is it. This is the situation. Now this is not going to work though. And personally, I'm thinking that we are in a situation where it is going to work. In the situation where the LM curve has become flat, because when the LM curve becomes flat, and that is a situation of liquidity trap, and liquidity trap essentially is a situation where you are that can arise when people don't want to part with their money. So the LM curve really is something like this. So in a situation like this, even if you actually increase the money supply, all that is going to happen is that there will be a new LM curve, but the output remain at this level. And if you want to increase output, there is no other way but to go for a fiscal stimulus. But why, more than this flat LM curve, it is important to understand that why today's situation, for example, can be thought of as the situation of which is basically your liquidity trap. In what sense can we be in liquidity trap today? Anyone would want to actually talk of that? Can we say that we are in liquidity trap right now? Because if we are not in liquidity trap, then it is not necessary go for a fiscal stimulus. We can actually work with monetary stimulus, which is what it seems that the RBI is trying to do, or what it seems that people like program and so on. They're not elaborate to detail, but something to have in mind. By the way, I mean, many economies have gone for the European economies, American economies have gone for a huge fiscal stimulus package. For some reason, we have not, but that is not our point of discussion here. The point is that can we say that our economy right now is in some kind of liquidity trap, and which means that unless we go for a fiscal expansion, things are not going to work? Can we say that? Yeah. Anyone would want to try that? Yes. All right. So, where is Amog? He always have something to say. Amog, why don't you answer? Are we in liquidity
Uh,
trap right now?
uh, Sir, I feel that we are in a situation of liquidity trap because right now people are not expecting the asset prices to go up, and therefore they are not willing to invest in assets. Therefore, any kind of monetary stimulus would not like it would lead to an increased money demand, but would not essentially lead to increase in the asset like investment in the assets. So maybe because of that we are in the kind of a
Yes, that
liquidity
is
trap.
that is
And
that is possibly one way. Amog, that is one way. You're not incorrect, but I think there are more
yes sir.
important ways in which you can actually, essentially, liquidity trap is a situation when you sit on your money. So, what are the ways in which you can sit on money? I mean, it's not simply about the asset prices. It may about, say, the small businesses there. So, a small businessman has certain payment obligations, also has some payments which are due, and but this chap is actually, what will he do? Will he sit on his money, or he will actually, he will address his payment obligation, he will pay the people whom he owes? What will this person be doing? So I think, the primarily money increase in money of demand will be coming from that particular source. So can someone actually describe on that line that why there can be a very high increase in the demand for money in this situation? Anyway, we did discuss it yesterday when I was trying to say that essentially what would happen is that a lot of people actually sit on the money. They don't make the payments. They don't meet their payment obligations, basically because their own payments are due. And similarly, the banks would be very skeptical here. So it's not a question simply of the bank have more money, then they start lending more. Bank also have to take the do the risk management, that they have to see that whether the whoever they are lending to will be able to return it or not. So they will assess those business. And in a situation where you don't see much demand for the product, even if there is someone who was considered creditworthy a few months back, may not be considered creditworthy now. So the working capital supply will also decline. So even if you pump in more money, banks will not be willing to give credit. The firms will not be willing to actually pay money to the input suppliers, let us say, or to the workers, let us say. So everyone actually sits on that money, basically, because you really don't expect the business to improve. One reason why you actually pay to the input supplier, one reason why the banks actually lend to the people is basically because they think that the business is going to be fine in future. But for somehow, if you don't think that, then this is exactly going to happen. A very good reason right now to think that business will not be fine. So many people would be actually losing jobs and so on and so forth. Then, we just discussed that a lot of people will be actually reducing their consumption expenditure, even if their income is the same. Will be postponing the decision to buy things and so on. So the demand is going to be low, and if demand is going to be low, people will actually won't think that the business is going to be good. If they don't think the business is going to be good, they will not be making payment. Banks will not be lending, and that's exactly what we mean by increase in the money demand. And this increase in the money demand then leads to the complete the situation of liquidity trap. And this is a situation where increasing money supply is actually not going to be very, very helpful. So yes, I think personally that we are in a situation of liquidity trap right now, and this is some kind of major fiscal stimulus. I don't think it is going to work, but government is really shying away right now from that kind of thing. Anyway, so yes, Sanskita, you want to say something?
Sir, what kind of economic
indicators show that we're in a liquidity trap, like in the general situation?
So right now you can close the mind and actually, close the eyes and say that we are in liquidity trap, because, you make calls to some businessmen and ask them that what are they doing, and they will tell you that they are sitting on their money, and the people who owe money to them are sitting on their money, and people to whom he owes money are sitting on their money. So it is really very, very clear. Typically, what is going to happen is that various ways in which one can get into liquidity trap. So right now, I don't think that there is much confusion. But today is a hopefully a rare situation. I mean, we do not know yet that how rare it is, or we are going to have similar kind of things in the future. I don't want to sound depressing, but let us see that how things turn up. But what you actually see, that liquidity trap can arise in various other situations. The asset prices are going down, and in that case, you sit on money, you don't spend in there. Or you can have what was known, say, post 2008. What happens that there is a crisis of confidence. The crisis of confidence typically will happen because of when there is a problem of effective demand, and that problem of effective demand may arise because of any reason. It may be arising in the financial market or anywhere. But once there is a problem of effective demand, once people have lost job, once they have lost their occupation, their income source, then the demand is going to be low. And in that situation, just because the demand is low, people are not willing to give you money. People are not willing to lend to you. Banks are not willing to lend to you. The input suppliers are not willing to give you inputs on credit, which is such an important part in a small business. So the business actually comes to a halt. And whoever has the money, they sit on their money, they sit on their cash, because there is no incentive to actually pay the cash to others, give the cash to others, because you really don't think that the normal business is going to continue. So this is the situation which has been described as the crisis of confidence. You don't have the confidence in the economy, you don't have the confidence in your business partner, or the banks do not have confidence in the small firms, and so on. So this is a situation which is going to lead to liquidity trap situation. So often the crisis of confidence would actually lead to the liquidity trap situation. The important thing is that you have to think that when is it that the money actually stops flowing? There is a complete break on the flow of money. So this is a situation which we actually think of as liquidity trap situation. All right. Yes.
Sir, I had a doubt.
Yes.
In normal situation where the LM curve is upward sloping, in
Yes.
that case, is it better to provide both fiscal and monetary stimulus at the same time, so that there is an increase in income and there is no crowding out, because the interest rate does not increase, it remains at the
Absolutely.
same
So that would be
position.
actually a very good way of doing it, that you actually do this. So this is the diagram which actually is what you are saying, that you do that. You simultaneously
Yes.
increase both the curve. So on the one hand, you undertake the fiscal stimulus, you give the fiscal stimulus, so which will cause the IS to increase, and simultaneously you actually increase the money supply also. So this would ensure that you have increase in the output and no decline in rate of interest. Now, if the investment is dependent on rate of interest, the investment will remain the same. But if further, as someone was saying earlier, that investment also depends on the level of output, then investment will also increase. I mean, in our framework right now, we are actually keeping investment as simply a function of rate of interest. But that is actually very good. So, the best way to actually undertake this kind of fiscal stimulus is by simultaneously giving the monetary stimulus. Then any kind of crowding out is ruled out per se. There will be a situation, there can be a situation which is something which we don't see in this diagram, that this may lead to a little bit of inflation. Why does it leads to a little bit of inflation? Is basically because the demand in various markets, in the goods market, may increase because of this monetary stimulus, may increase much before the supply is start to catch up. So, because it's not that, just by increasing the demand, the supply will actually increase immediately. The supply is going to actually take time. In the interim, then you can see the inflation. But even if, inflation is bad when the inflation becomes very high, otherwise it's just some cost which could be actually paid for if you want to have higher output and higher employment and so on. So I don't see per se there is anything wrong with that. So yes, what you just asked was actually completely what you said was really correct. I think is actually is really useful. Crowding out is what we have discussed. So they are talking about a complete crowding out, perfect crowding out. But that will happen only in the classical world, where you are actually where you think that output is something which is always at full employment level of output. In the other cases, when output is not full employment level of output, there is a kind of crowding out in the sense that the investment is declining, but expenditure is increasing by 10 and output is also increasing. So you see, government expenditure is a injection into the system. And the decline in investment is actually a leakage in the system. The very fact that the injection, that output is increasing must be so because the injection is more than the leakage. So if the government expenditure increases by 10 and the output is increases by 100, then it can't be the leakage is more than 10. Because if leakage was more than 10, then the output would not be increased. So the leakage has to be less than 10, right? So that means that the decline in private investment because of the increasing rate of interest is going to